Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Mel from MelDidItHerself, and I'm a social service worker turned furniture refinisher, DIYer, small business owner, and content creator. I've learned everything I know about these industries thanks to people who shared their knowledge on the internet. So I'm paying it forward by bringing you my tips, lessons learned, and sharing my journey in this space with you. So thank you so much for being here, being curious, and being a lifelong learner like me. Let's hop into it. What is up, my friends and fellow busybees? Today, we're taking it back to basics and talking about, honestly, probably the most important tool in my world of furniture painting and refinishing, which is the paintbrush. I basically always hand paint my furniture pieces because I absolutely love the process. I find it so therapeutic and I find that it's a lot less wasteful with product compared to spraying or rolling, so I often opt for it. However, there is a certain standard of quality that I want to make sure my furniture pieces uphold for my clients who are purchasing the makeovers, and one way to ensure that I meet that mark is by choosing proper paintbrushes for the project, the look, and the finish that I'm hoping to achieve, and the shape and the size of the piece. It can really be the difference of ending up with a shoddy finish and one that looks more professionally done. When I first started out doing this as a hobby, I was really cheap. Still am, if I'm being honest. And so I would prioritize keeping costs down and would buy my paintbrushes from Dollarama, which is the dollar store here in Canada. It was like $1 to $2.50 per paintbrush, and they had a few different shapes and sizes and types of paintbrushes to choose from. However, I quickly noticed the annoyance of having the bristles fall out, sometimes in huge clumps and chunks from the ferrule, which is that metal piece at the end of the bristles that holds everything in there. And I also noticed that it was harder to get a smooth finish with some of them because the bristles weren't all the same length, or some of them would break, and it wouldn't leave the nicest finish. All that to say, I quickly realized the benefit of investing in some more expensive but better quality brushes, and they're brushes that I still use till this day for the most part, and that haven't lost any bristles and still provide a great finish. It's all about finding the right ones for the job and also taking good care of them and maintaining them properly. So let's do a Coles Notes review of the different types of paintbrushes you can come across when looking for ones to work with on your furniture pieces. First off, let's talk bristles. Typically, you will come across two choices when looking at paintbrushes that work best for furniture painting specifically, which are natural bristles or synthetic bristles. Natural bristles tend to be a little bit more coarse and rigid because they're made up of animal hair, and so they are typically best used for things like applying wax and creating more textured looks. A lot of the time you'll see people using these types of brushes when applying chalk paint as well, again because there are a lot of techniques using that medium that require you to create some texture. One added benefit of natural bristles is that they typically hold a little bit more paint for much longer. So you can paint for longer without having to dip back into your paint over and over again. Fun fact. So this type of bristle is actually what I had unknowingly initially been using primarily when I was getting my brushes from Dollarama, because I was using what I would now refer to as a chip brush. These days, I use those chip brushes when I'll be using oil-based finishes like stain or top coat because they're cheaper and thus it doesn't hurt as much as when I throw it out after I'm done using it for the project. You can definitely clean them out with the proper products that would clean oil-based products, but like I said, they often start falling apart pretty quickly, so it isn't usually worth the hassle. As a result, they aren't the most sustainable choice, so I do use them sparingly when I really need to, but natural bristled that's going to be hard to say. Natural bristled brushes in general are great for waxes, like I said, so I do have a few brushes in my kit that are made for that purpose that I use exclusively for that use. The shape of them is also made for that purpose, so they are in a kind of circular formation, and the bristles are really densely packed so that they don't move around too much, so that you have a lot of control on where and how the wax is being applied. I like to have at least 3 wax brushes so that I have one specifically for clear wax, one for white wax, and one for black wax, so that I don't risk cross-contaminating the different colors if they aren't perfectly cleaned out. Since the density actually works for the better, these are the brushes that I'm a little bit more lenient about when I'm cleaning up, because if they stiffen up a bit, it kind of helps me out the next time I go to apply wax, since I basically only want it to sit on the tips of the bristles and not get too deep in between the bristles. The wax brushes I currently have, use, and like are the Colorantic Wax Silk Brush, the Country Chic Wax Brush, and then I use an Sloan medium round paintbrush. I also have one natural bristle brush that I keep solely for applying furniture salve so that it stays, or not so that, but it does end up staying pretty oily, but very nicely moisturized. And for that, I use another one of the Sloan medium round paintbrushes. I'll leave a link for all of the brushes that I mentioned in this episode in the episode show notes, so feel free to go there and check them out if you're in the market for some new ones. So synthetic bristles on synthetic brushes, on the other hand, are made out of materials like polyester, nylon, or a mix of the two sometimes. Since those are manufactured materials, they often provide a smoother finish, and they're much softer, much smoother to the touch, and they're also easier to clean. This type of a brush is what I use the large majority of the time when painting furniture, and there are about 1 million different types of brushes with synthetic bristles that you can find. I don't like to be too wasteful, so for the most part, I still use the ones that I first got and have gotten some new ones over the years to add to the collection, but by no means have I tried every brush on the market, so take my recommendations with a grain of salt. There's likely tons of others out there that work just as great, maybe even better, who knows, but these ones have worked for me up until now, and I haven't had any reason to look elsewhere. That being said, though, if you do have a favorite brush that I don't mention in this episode, please do send me a DM on Instagram. It's at MelDidItHerself, and let me know what it is, or you can send me an email. My email is mel@meldiditherself.ca. Because Christmas and my birthday, it's a big one, I'm turning 30, not a big deal, are coming up in a few months, and I'm always looking for items to add to my wish list. Alright, so now that we know what the brushes themselves are made up of, what other factors do we need to look at? Your budget is definitely one of them, because there is a large spectrum of brushes available, and some are just a few dollars, and some are like $100, maybe even more, I don't know. So just remember that just because they're more expensive, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are better performing than the rest. So try not to get too sucked into the marketing, especially when you're first starting out and likely trying to save on costs wherever you can. Most of the brushes that I have range from around maybe the $9 mark to probably like $60, maybe not even, as the most expensive brush that I have. If you're going to be doing a lot of hand painting with that brush, I also recommend going in store to see brushes in person if you ever can, because it can really help you to find out if that brush will actually be comfortable in your hand when painting. I have pretty bony hands that can tend to get crampy fairly easily, so there's some brushes that are just too big or don't fit properly into the grooves of my hand, and when I use them for extended periods of time, I definitely pay for it afterwards and need to do some extra hand stretches. So especially if you're going to be investing some coin into one, feel it out, or even if you order it online, hold it in your hand for a while when it comes in before opening up all the packaging to make sure that it will fit well with you and your needs. Now, I want to go through the different types of brushes or categories of brushes that I've found to be useful to have in my stash and at the ready as I've moved through my many furniture makeovers over the years, and I'll provide a recommendation for what I personally use within each category. First up, you will always want to have a few different smaller artist brushes for the hard to reach corners, small detail spots, or if you need to finish off some detailed lines or any fine work like that. I typically just get a value pack from Michaels in their craft section of little artist brushes that people would usually use for acrylics or whatever, and they have worked great and actually lasted a really long time before the bristles started to shed for how inexpensive they were. I recommend having some teeny tiny ones whose bristles go to a point at the end, and one whose bristles are more fanned out and are like a straight line, like you would picture a normal paintbrush. And then ones that have those same shapes but are just a little bit bigger for the times that you need to do that fine-tuned work on a larger space. The pack that I currently have was actually a set of watercolor brushes called the Mont Marte Gallery Series. I couldn't find an exact link for that one, but I linked a very similar pack at Michaels for a similar price point. Another great shape of brush to have in your kit is a round brush. Instead of using ones with natural bristles, I have used a synthetic bristle brush that is round in the past for waxes, so that is definitely an option. But what I find them most useful for is when you're painting things like spindles on a chair or other circular shapes like that. The positioning and the shape of the bristles and how they're kind of brought together really just helps to mold to the shape of what you're trying to paint without getting too much splattering or excessive paint going everywhere. The one I use and love is the Zebra Brushes round brush. Zebra round brush. That's what it's called. Now for larger flat surfaces, I will admit that I've gotten into the habit of sometimes using a roller just because it does go on nice and thin and quite flawlessly, although sometimes you end up with that dreaded orange peel finish, which annoys me to no end. But for the people who want to use brushes for these parts, having a good flat brush that is a decent size will be really helpful. Again, it depends on your hand size and what your wrist can comfortably hold, and the typical sizes of your pieces that will determine how big you need to or want to go with the style of brush. The one I often reach for is the Zebra Chiseled Wedge, which is 2 inches, and the bristles are angled, so I find it provides a really nice, even, flat finish. Paired with my other tips from episode 11, how to get a flawless-ish finish when hand painting furniture, you can ensure that it ends up looking silky smooth. In addition to the tips in that episode, which will be linked in the show notes, for larger flat surfaces like a dresser top, for example, I find that slightly overlapping my lines of paint as I go back and forth helps to make sure that there's no visible lines that end up in the finish, and it all melds together really nicely. Also worth noting that having a good paint that is for that intended use will add to it looking great as well. Now, it's great to have a big brush that can cover a good-sized area, but what if that space you need to paint is in a tighter spot inside of a cabinet door, for example, where a normal-sized brush with a 6-inch long handle won't necessarily fit and allow you to reach all of the sides of that space? You need a little stubby buddy in your life. This is a paintbrush that typically has a normal-sized head, maybe slightly smaller, but the handle is much shorter, basically the size of your hand, so that you can get into those harder-to-reach areas. My personal favorite is the Wooster Shortcut Angle Sash Brush, I believe it's 2 inches, that I got from Home Depot. I find that the rubber handle is super comfortable and easy to use because you can kind of bend it if you need to, and the bristles are really well packed. One that I don't find personally quite as comfortable for whatever reason, so I don't often grab for it, but I hear a ton of people rave about, is the Zebra Palm Pro, which I believe is also a 2-inch. And the last specific use type of paintbrush that I would recommend furniture artists have in their kit is one that is specifically for top coating pieces. Again, if you're going to be using oil-based top coats, then I recommend using a roller or something more disposable if you don't plan on doing the proper cleaning of those items. Sometimes people use those foam brushes for top coating. Personally, I find that they don't leave that nice of a finish for me, and I don't like how they perform because for whatever reason, they're often starting to fall apart by the time I'm done using them on a project, and they can leave like air bubbles and stuff in the finish, so they're not for me, but that is an option as well. But even if you're using water-based top coats like polyurethane or polyacrylic, I always recommend having 1 or 2 specific brushes that you only use for this purpose. This will ensure that you're never accidentally contaminating your product if you've had a brush that you've previously painted with, and then you cleaned it, and then you use it to top coat and found out the hard way that you missed a little clump of black paint that was deep in the bristles, but then fell loose into your top coat, which is now turning a milky blue color, much to your dismay. Trust me, it can happen. So going this route of having one brush used for this purpose will help to avoid that. For larger, flatter surfaces when top coating, again, sometimes I'll use a roller, but often I'll use my zebra fan brush. The bristles, like the name suggests, fan out really nicely, but there's just the right amount of them so that it doesn't pick up more product than you need, and it disperses it really nicely and things don't get all globbed up. I actually have 2 of those fan brushes that I use one of them for painting and one for top coating. I actually really like the shape of them. Another one that has become a recent favorite for top coating specifically that actually cleans up super easily. So I break my rule a little bit and sometimes I use it for top coating and sometimes use it with mineral paint. Don't tell on me. Is the Country Chic oval brush. It's just really sleek with densely packed bristles that provide a really nice even finish with both types of products. I also will sometimes use my sort of go-to everyday brush that I tend to pick up often because it just works in so many different circumstances on so many different products and projects. It's the Dixie Bell, the Bell brush. I'm actually now on my second one because I think I went a little bit too hard with the first and eventually the head of it fell off. Actually, while I was filming a Instagram story, it was pretty funny. I was quite shocked. So one of my very awesome friends bought me a new one for my birthday, so now I have 2. I did end up gluing the first one back together, but the second one seemed a little bit different in terms of having more bristles that are really tapered, which lets you get into smaller ledges and nooks if you need to. The thing that I think makes me really enjoy using this brush is that the shape of the handle has a little bit of I don't really know how to describe it, like a blob in the middle of it where you hold it. It gets bigger in that area. It's like a little bit of a ball. So it makes it really comfortable to hold, and it also ensures that you're holding it in the right spot every time. I like it a lot. I was hoping to go over ways to clean and care for your paintbrushes, but I think I've rambled on for long enough today, but I'll be sure to add that to the list to plan for a future episode. So make sure you're following or you're subscribed to the channel, depending where you're listening in on today, so that you don't miss that episode when it goes live. And somewhere I'll also be sharing different tips about doing furniture makeovers, including things like how to care for your paintbrushes, is in my Friday Furniture Focus newsletter, where I'll be bringing weekly furniture flip inspo, sharing tips and tricks to help you transform pieces, and a weekly Q&A with some awesome furniture artists that I've come across online and getting to know a little bit more about them, their work, and their business. So if you're interested in receiving that, head over to the show notes to link to my website, MelDidItHerself.ca, and scroll down and sign up to receive these updates because I will be launching that very soon. And something that you may not know about me, I love little motivational messages. They literally always get me fired up, and I keep a running list of ones that are especially catchy or speak to me in the Notes app on my phone. So I'm going to end every podcast episode with one of those that I've noted down over the years in hopes that you leave our time here each week feeling inspired, motivated, and ready to take on whatever comes your way this week. So this week's Mel's motivational message is, I'm here to get it right, not to be right. I'm here to get it right, not to be right. I thought this was applicable for today's episode because it's kind of all about being able to take a step back, be objective when you're looking at the project that you're working on, the supplies that you're using, the tools that you're using to transform that piece, and be objective and maybe take the ego out of it a little bit, because sometimes it can hurt if you are realizing, that you've invested all this money into a paintbrush that isn't really working for you, or the opposite, like I was doing, where I was trying to invest as little money as possible to get the job done. And you have to remember that you're here to get it right, not to be right. So just because in my head I was thinking, I'm saving money, this gets the job done just as well, in using these disposable brushes, I had to take a step back and look at how often I was pulling those bristles out of the finish of the paint and how that was leaving marks in the end that I was either having to go back and fix, or just putting pieces out that weren't to their highest standard that I would like them to be. And I had to realize that I'm here to get it right. I'm here to learn, adapt, evolve, and eventually try and get it right. I don't have to be right the first time. And there's no shame in trying something out, seeing how it works for you, and setting a set timeline so that you give it a fair shot, and then reevaluating it and saying, is this working for me? Is this meeting my needs in this point in my life, in this season of my life? Things could have changed since the last time you have evaluated whatever the thing is. And am I willing to help myself, to help my future self by taking a step back, removing my ego, removing whatever other baggage that I might be carrying, and looking at this thing objectively and asking myself if there's something that I can do today to help improve or change what it is that I'm doing. I'm speaking in very vague terms because we can talk about paintbrushes, but this can also go to so many areas of our lives as well, right? If you're in conflict with someone, a friend, a family member, your partner, and you're dead set on whatever the thing is that was your side of the argument, we're here to get it right, not to be right. How can we compromise? How can we go into conversation with people, offer both sides of where we're coming from, and then evaluate whether there's a way that we can compromise, or whether there was a miscommunication somewhere down the line, or whether we're making assumptions about what the other person is thinking. There's so many ways that this quote has come into my life at different points in time. I previously, when speaking with a director of mine, had not an actor, director, like director of my department. Let's make that clear. But we were working on a big project and we were going in a very certain direction with it, and they were asking my input on said project, and I didn't think that the direction that we were going was the right direction to be going for a couple different reasons. And so I explained that to them and said, I think we're here to get it right, not to be right. And we could admit if we have been moving in a direction that maybe wasn't the right way to go, or maybe it was the right way to go, but we've since learned more and we've since gotten more perspectives and talked to different stakeholders. So we now know that there is something better that we can be doing. Let's aim to get it right and not to prove that we are the ones that are right and make the world kind of adhere to the thing that we're dead set on, right? So again, take the time in your days when you find yourself at a standstill, when you find yourself in conflict, when you find yourself, maybe feeling a little bullheaded about something, a certain something's getting you in your feelings. Think, am I trying to be right, or am I trying to get it right? And hopefully that can help to provide some clarity on whatever it is that you're facing this week. I hope that makes sense. I hope that resonates in a way that it has continued to resonate with me over the last couple of years since I came across it. And if you're enjoying the podcast so far, I would love it if you would go to the podcast page on whatever platform you're listening on today and leave me a rating. It's out of 5 stars. I always prefer if you lean to the right side of it and go for a full 5 star, but I'll leave that part up to you. And if you could go onto iTunes or Apple Podcasts and leave a rating, letting everyone know why you love the podcast. It doesn't have to be long, but just leave a little something about why you tune in every Thursday to join us on this furniture refinishing ride, because that's going to help to get it pushed out organically to more people who would be interested in this, who want to tackle some furniture makeovers, maybe start a business painting and refinishing furniture pieces, and so they can discover it and join us. All right, that's it for now. I appreciate your time, and I'll catch you guys next week.